4 minutes to go, and then party times. Logan the Layman Critic here. Once again, putting on my layman gamer hat. And because we're in the holiday season, with New Year's coming up, I figured I'd play a game, Ghostbusters 2, because Ghostbusters 2 is set around Christmas and New Year's. So, um, let's jump right into it. Alright, who should I play? Peter, Ray, Egon, Winston, or Lewis? That's a tough one. We'll go with Venkman and Spangler. Okay. So, let me start off by saying that Ghostbusters 2 is a great movie and a great sequel. Full stop. I use no qualifiers with that. I'm tired of people kind of making excuses for this movie, as far as like, oh, Ghostbusters 2 is good. It's not as good as the... No. Ghostbusters 2 is a good sequel. It's funny. It's incredibly quotable. I think that the special effects are better than the original. I think the villain is better. I think that it expands on the characters in interesting ways, particularly Venkman. And it's a lot of fun. There are obviously criticisms of this movie, and I'd like to talk about that as we're playing this. That I'd like to make a counter argument against. So the first one, and it's probably the most obvious, is that Ghostbusters 2 is a retread of the original. So it has a lot of the same narrative and visual beats as the first movie. And my argument against that is, so what? At the time, for most of film history, and even now, the vast majority of sequels do this. This is not anything new. It's not unique to Ghostbusters 2. So the idea that Ghostbusters 2 is a bad sequel because it does this is kind of ridiculous. Because, look, there's a lot of franchises that have great sequels that retread visual and narrative beats. Star Wars does it. Indiana Jones does it. Terminator does it. Alien does it. James Bond does it. Gosh. And it's not even uncommon for comedies. It's especially common for comedies. It's usually, most of the time, comedies sequels aren't good for that very reason. But Ghostbusters 2 I think is different because it does use similar stuff, like the montage and having like a giant figure of some kind walking through the streets of New York. I get it, but it's not. I sort of take it to be more like it's taking these ideas and sort of turning them on their head. And one thing in particular, I think, that works well, and I think even the latest movie, Ghostbusters Afterlife, kind of played to this strength, is that the Ghostbusters should always be the underdog in some way. So in the first movie, you have them as a bunch of down and out college students who decide to go into business, and they have to fight against skepticism from the community and also, government that doesn't seem to know how to get out of its own way. And then in the second movie, they've been discredited, humiliated, disgraced, and they kind of have to work their way back up into the public's favor again and regain their credibility. And then, of course, in the latest one, Egon ditches them to because he believes that there's an imminent threat coming, and it kind of breaks up the Ghostbusters and makes things really difficult for him. And it's up to these kids to kind of pick up the family business, as it were. So I don't have a problem with this idea. I think because the characters need to be in that position in some way, and it works. Another criticism, and I really don't get this one at all, is the idea that Ghostbusters 2 is in some way kind of a kidified version of the first movie. And look, a lot of people, well, so like a lot of people will say, oh, there's not enough swearing. The characters aren't smoking all the time like they are in the first one. Well, for one thing, I think the trend in movies at that time was that there was less smoking. I think as people became more aware of how unhealthy it was, and even you had the drug war going on at the time too in the 80s. Don't forget that. So just say no was the big thing, and so it kind of made sense that they would tone down the smoking, and it's not completely absent. Uh, for example, Ray has a cigar in I think at least 3 scenes, maybe 4. He's the one character that seems to still smoke. So it doesn't really bother me that maybe these other characters, kind of kicked the habit in the 5 years that happened between Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2. Um, there's also some off-color humor that's still in the sequel. So this idea that it was it lost all its adult humor is kind of absurd to me. And it should also be noted that Dan Aykroyd has always uh, classified Ghostbusters as a family picture, starting with the original. There's an interview where he was on, I think it was Johnny Carson. He refers to it as a family picture. There's a promotional video that he did with Bill Murray, I think to kind of pitch the film to theaters. And it's actually, I think it's on the box set that they just recently put out. Was kind of limited edition, but he says the same thing. It's a family picture. He specifically talks about it being a PG film, which at that point in time, I think most of the comedies, if not all of them, that those actors had done were all 17 and up. So, for example, Stripes, Blues Brothers, things like that. So there was something intentional about this being for a wider audience. Now, does that mean it's just for kids? No, of course not. There's plenty of there's plenty of stuff that's um, more adult oriented in both movies. A lot of sexual humor and things of that nature. But I think as a kid, um, I first saw these movies. Oh goodness, I was probably like 5, 6 years old. So some of that stuff just kind of went over my head. So notably the ghost that visits Ray and kind of has seduces him in his sleep. Had no comprehension of what was going on there, just as well. But that stuff, even though something maybe not quite that explicit appears in the second movie, there's still sex jokes. And again, as a child, totally over my head, no understanding of that. Um, I've also heard people talk about how the cartoon or the toy line somehow influenced the the movie. Like I remember, I think it was Hack the Movies. They really were tearing into this movie for some reason. They're talking about like the slime, the color of the slime was pink because of the toy. It's like no, the toys had nothing to do with it. There's actually a book. I think it's called like Ghostbusters: A Visual History. I think that's the name of the book. I have it. I actually have it across from the room, but I can't read the title of it. But it's a big volume. Highly recommend it. And it goes into history of the production of the first 2 movies. I think a little bit of the the one the Answer the Call and the cartoons. And they talk about like settling on the color of the slime, and at no point is there anything mentioned about the toys having any sort of influence over making that decision. They worked through several different ideas of colors that they could use, and they settled on this sort of pinkish red color. And I think it works better, to be perfectly honest. I think it's actually more um, ominous, I guess, than if they had used like a yellow or a green or something like that. Um, and I think it also sort of brings to mind the movie The Blob, which there's a lot of homages to that movie in Ghostbusters too, with the people running outside the theater, it coming through the bathtub to attack somebody, um, it encasing the museum. There's a lot like the diner at the end of the Blob. Um, so yeah, so there's another thing. Slimer, I think Slimer was obviously incredibly popular in no small part because of the cartoon, but he was the one loose end from the first movie, so it made sense to include him in the second as well. And it should be noted that he originally had a larger presence in the film, but test audiences didn't really take to him that well. I think they thought maybe there was too much, so they kind of left him. I think he's only in two scenes in the final cut. So, and what was the other thing? Oh, this one kind of baffled me. This idea the cartoon influenced the physical appearance of Winston, because in the original movie, Winston has a mustache. In the cartoon, he does not, and in the second movie, he does not. But the fact is, and Ernie Hudson has even said this himself, he just happened to not be rocking a mustache at that point in time in his career. I guess there were other movies at that time that he still doesn't have a mustache in those movies either. So it had nothing to do with the cartoon. Obviously, the cartoon was tremendously popular, and that probably fueled a desire to have a sequel. I won't say that there was no influence whatsoever from the cartoon. I think that'd be silly. But I think it's greatly overstated by people who just don't happen to like Ghostbusters 2 for some reason. What else? I'm trying to think of any other criticism. Well, okay, so I would say if there's any criticisms that I have with Ghostbusters 2, is I do think that the climax lacks the stakes that the first movie has, I should say. Um, you know, with them facing off against Gozer, and it's like they can't beat Mr. Stay Puft. They have to kind of roll the dice and risk everything, their own lives, the fate of the world, in order to stop this threat that is going to destroy the world anyway. So you don't really have anything that matches that level of danger when they're facing off against Vigo. So that would be my one criticism. It doesn't quite have the same punch as the first movie. That being said, I still love the showdown with Vigo. I think that character is great. I think he's a way better villain than Gozer, because his presence is felt in the film pretty much from the get-go. You know who the threat is, and that painting is freaking terrifying. My brother actually has a poster of that in his bedroom. He does not sleep in his bedroom anymore. He sleeps in our living room, and I'm wondering if that is in no small part because of Vigo being in his bedroom. Other things that I like. I had mentioned earlier with Venkman's character evolving a little bit. If you look at the first movie, he's definitely somebody you could tell he's kind of a cad, or a wannabe cad, and he not the most scrupulous person. He's really wanting to win over Dana to kind of hop into bed with her. He's not the most, like I said, he's not the most scrupulous person. And it's clear that he doesn't really believe in the work that they're doing. He's just kind of doing it as like, oh well, I can. This is a an opportunity to make some money. In the second movie, that's still there. You know, he's still obviously a little bit of a huckster, but you can tell that he's changed a bit. You know, having the disgrace of losing the Ghostbusters business and losing Dana, he's matured a little bit, and I like the idea that he's a little less cynical. You know, he doesn't quite take it. He still doesn't take it as quite as seriously as his colleagues, but it's still he recognizes the value in it, I guess. And he sees Dana's son, who may or may not actually be his son. They never really fully answer that. Um, him wanting to take things more seriously, like he wants to make up with her and kind of take responsibility, and I like that. It really does give the character opportunity to grow, and I feel like the reconciliation between him and Dana, I actually think it's a stronger build up than in the original movie where he's trying to romance her. That moves so quickly, and it's a little hard. It's like kind of a hard pill for me to swallow. That at the end of the movie, she's actually like, "Oh yeah, I'll kiss you. I'm, I'm willing to give this a shot." So, the score by Randy Edelman, I really like. It's really creepy and moody, and I should say that the mood for Ghostbusters 2, I really like. It feels very. It feels a little darker in some ways, and that part of that might be, man, part of that might be just how it's shot. But I also think that the score, relies a little bit more on synth. The I guess you could call it the spirit motif, because that was one of the tracks by it was Dougie Fresh. So that I guess if you could say the melody from that is referenced quite frequently in the score, and I think it's great. I have the score to Ghostbusters 2, and sadly that I don't think there are any pieces on the CD that have that motif, which is unfortunate because it's a great score. There's some creepy stuff in that. I really love it. um, let's talk a little bit about this game. So, um, new Ghostbusters 2 um, was created by HAL Laboratory, which some of you might recognize that name because they helped develop the Super Smash Brothers games, and they're known for Kirby, and I think that's basically their two big contributions to video games. I'm sure they have more, but those are the ones I know of. And this game was released in Europe and Japan. Activision had the license to Ghostbusters, so the only way you can play this on a Nintendo is if you have a Retron, which I do, but because this is a recording, obviously I can't I can't play it on a Retron. Um, I think it's a lot more fun. Um, the one for Activision I do enjoy, but the gameplay is very very different. For starters, it's kind of more of a shoot 'em up, almost like a little bit more of a simplified Contra. You're using the slime blower the whole time, which I think if most of us are honest, the slime blower is probably our least favorite technology that the Ghostbusters utilize. Um, and it's shorter. I think it's 6 stages. It is very challenging. I will say that. And unfortunately, there's no showdown with Vigo in the Activision game. There is in this one, and you will see it today. Um, I chose this one because it's more fun, in my opinion, uh, and I'd have more time to talk about one of my favorite comedies. Another thing that I really like about this movie, um, Janosch, Peter McNichol. My goodness, wow, he really. Um, I think it's a testament to the quality of these movies that there was a lot of um, freedom for improvisation. So with the first movie, you had that particular character, that role was filled by the character of Lewis because he's kind of the loser that has a thing for Dana, and a lot of his character was improvised by Rick Moranis, and Rick Moranis obviously returns in the sequel, although his role within the story is he functions differently. So Janos takes over in the second movie, and it's interesting to note Janos was not the character's name in the script. He wasn't a foreigner. Um, his name was Jason, if I'm not mistaken. And Peter McNichol decided, hey, there's not much character for this role. Can I play around with it? And of course, the director Ivan Reitman said, yeah, sure. So he came up with this whole backstory about Janos being from Carpathia, so he already has sort of an established connection to Vigo because they're from the same country. And he gave him this funny accent and all these great character moments. So the dialogue is, I'm assuming he kind of tailored it to his own characterization. It wasn't scripted that way. So I give huge props to Peter McNichol for really bringing his A game to that character. And I've seen him in other things since then, but nothing beats that character. I think that will forever be his I think his defining role. And he's been on Numbers. He was on Ally McBeal. He did Dracula Dead and Loving It, Bean, Adam's Family Values. He's been in a lot of stuff, and that's not even all of it. But um, yeah, Peter McNichol's great. Janos is a great character. I do love it. I think we're almost to the end. Oh, I should note another thing about these games. So even though Activision did not release this game, they did not publish or program it. There is a game that they published for Game Boy that came here in the US, and it uses the same engine, same graphics as this. However, and I actually, to be perfectly honest, I think it's actually the best of the Ghostbusters 2 video games. It has actually more variety in it. I think the level design is different. There's little cutscenes. You have more. You have different weapons at your disposal, and you can switch the Ghostbusters. You can use different Ghostbusters at different points in the game, and they might have certain equipment. So, for example, you might run across Winston in the game, and he has a slime blower, so you can switch over to him. The boss battles are different, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it if you're ever able to come across it. I would recommend playing it. I have this funny story, but for whatever reason, when I was in high school, and this would have been like in the early 2000s, I remember hearing people claim that Vigo the Carpathian was a real person. And I think the first time I heard it was on a school bus, somebody talking about it, about all the different ways that they attempted to kill him, which is referenced in the movie. And then somebody else told me was talking about a story about Vigo the Carpathian. He gathered a bunch of people together, I think they were like poor people or something like that, locked them in this building. I don't know if it was supposed to be a church or something like that, and then just burned it down with them in it. And I knew right away, okay, no, I smell nonsense, because this didn't this is something that happened, but it did not happen with a Vigo the Carpathian. It was actually Prince Vlad the Third, Dracula. So, and that I think that was the first time I realized that Vigo was influenced by that character was based in part off of Vlad the Third. He's kind of an amalgam of him and Grigory Rasputin, with the whole idea of Rasputin. I'm trying to think. I think he was stabbed, he was shot, he was poisoned, and it took many different things to actually finally kill him. They said he had sort of had this supernatural power. And in the early drafts of the script, Vigo, or the character that would become Vigo, that he he was more heavily based off of Rasputin. If you look at the concept art, he's got the robes and stuff like that. He was supposed to be a monk, and then he gradually had more influence from Vlad Dracula. I mentioned before how I really love the villain in this movie, and yeah, I mean he's genuinely creepy, and it's funny to me. I think because that actor was known for being very unpleasant, both behind the scenes and uh, outside of his career and his personal life. You never really hear much talked about him within the film itself. Um, the book that I mentioned earlier, they really don't talk about him very much. Most of what I know about Wilhelm von Homburg is from an article that I read, and a video that discusses him. And yeah, he was not a good dude. I think he was kind of perfect for that part, because he just did some awful things to his family members. He didn't really have friends because he liked to make people uncomfortable, and there was some things within, like, causing problems with the law, and I don't want to go into detail on it, because it might it might get my video flagged. Suffice it to say, not a good guy. But he was his performance is excellent. He's a genuinely scary bad guy, and I think his dialogue is great. It's very, like, kind of verbose. Darn it. Um, he's voiced by I should say he's dubbed by Max von Sydow, and you know Max von Sydow's voice is very distinctive, and kind of booming, and has a very authoritative uh, sound to it. Incredible actor, and uh, yeah, just great all around character of Vigo. Certain things that I liked, like there's a moment where the effect hasn't aged that great now, uh, but there's a scene where Dana is in the museum working, and Vigo smirks at her, and she turns around, and he kind of quickly goes back to his normal, natural, uh, his resting face as it is in the painting. And again, it's not a great effect now. It's very noticeable, sort of a composite effect, or I don't know what the technical term would be for it, but it's genuinely creepy. And I love the music in the scene too. That's another little piece that I wish was included on the score for the CD, but is sadly missing. Other things are like when Ray and Egon are looking at photographs that they had taken of the painting, and Ray recognizes the River of Slime in one of the photos, and you have this creepy music playing, underneath the scene, and the door latch slowly starts turning, and they're locked in, and everything starts lighting on fire, and that was actually a reshoot because they wanted to kind of up the threat, and I think it was a very good decision. And another good thing that they added in reshoots was they're going through an abandoned subway tunnel, and they come across all these like decapitated heads that are on pikes, and they hear a disembodied voice, which may or may not be Winston. That's a great scene because it's sort of it's both funny because they're yelling, they're like, hey, hey, hello, hello, and then Winston says hello, and there's just dead silence, and then you hear Winston, and it's simultaneously hilarious and terrifying, and that's that's a great example of like how you can somehow juggle one tone with another. Like I don't know, and it's amazing to me too because again that was a reshoot that was added in post. They went back and they added more in. So that was uh, another example of I think why the film is so effective. Here is Janosch. I don't care for this boss battle. I find it incredibly repetitive, and once you have the pattern down, the challenge is kind of lost. Trying to think of what else I wanted to talk about. I have so. It's funny when I play these games. I have so much in my mind, and because I can't really keep talking points with me, I inevitably end up forgetting something. Well, let's talk a little bit about the success of this film or failure, depending on how you look at it. So, uh, this film is sometimes regarded as a flop, which is not strictly speaking true. It made good money. It grossed a decent amount. It was not as big of a success as the original, but you also have to consider what movies came out at that time. The two biggest movies of 1989 were Batman and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, both tremendously huge successes. And I think Ivan Reitman, uh, sort of assessing the situation in hindsight, the film was probably a little bit more optimistic than what kind of movies were coming out at the time. I think the optimism of 1984 had sort of faded, and you had movies that were a little bit maybe not necessarily cynical, but kind of looked at um, the optimism of this movie with a little bit of scorn. So, and I think maybe they waited too long. I think again the movie is very popular. I know most people I know like this movie, and I know several people who like it more than the original. Um, I I kind of oscillate in that direction. Sometimes it's somewhere between liking this equally to the first one and liking it more. I will say that I saw Ghostbusters 2 first. My neighbor had it on tape, and um, they later got the first movie, so I saw them out of order. So it may be that I have a certain attachment to this movie um, that gives me a preference for it, but it was probably only a couple months in between seeing the two movies. So, uh, yeah, I really like this movie. I make no qualms about it. And I think it's, in a lot of ways, I think it's underrated. It has a lot to offer. And as I said, lots of sequels, lots of franchises recycle stuff. This movie is no exception. I forgot to mention Back to the Future. Back to the Future does the same thing too. It like I mean it like there's a self awareness to that too. And maybe that kind of shields it from that criticism. But I will go to bat for this movie. I think it's a lot of fun and adds a lot to darn it adds a lot to the original. I feel like they're it completes the story. Even though Ghostbusters is the original is obviously meant to be was intended as a standalone film, I do feel like Ghostbusters 2 is a good completion to the story to their journey. And I really like Afterlife. I think Afterlife's great. Answer the Call. Less we say about that one, the better. I think I saw it in a movie theater that I work at, and um, I remember laughing one time that entire film, and it wasn't even from the main cast. It was the guy who plays Gabe in The Office. He's at the beginning of the movie. I think he's like a tour guide or something, and he makes some remark about it was like a circus torturing elephants, and it made me laugh. Just because my brother's a big circus aficionado, and I think he probably would have taken umbrage to some of the claims made with that. Anyway, yeah, Answer the Call's not good. Uh, Afterlife was great. Um, I think it would serve as a good bookend to the Ghostbusters, the old characters. I was glad that they brought everybody back, mostly everybody. It was a good send off for the original crew. I'm glad they got to go back on one more adventure. My understanding is that they're going to try and make another one, which I think is an ill-advised move. I think I don't know. I think with the socio-political climate right now being the way it is, darn it. Um, I don't like the way movies are being made these days because it's all about quotas and having some sort of agenda baked into the story. And I just want to have a fun movie, and Afterlife was just a fun movie. It wasn't being didactic or anything like that, and I have a feeling that we're not going to be afforded that luxury this next time around. Okay, come on. Come on. Almost got you. Now we become one. It's a weird thing in the climax of this movie. Once V goes out of the painting, he is surprisingly not very talkative. Because up till this point in the movie, he's rather verbose, grandiose. He has these long speeches to the point they actually make a joke about it. um, but yeah, and maybe because the climax was reshot. Um, maybe they didn't want to script new dialogue for the character because Wilhelm von Homburg was again not easy to work with, and I think they may have been pressed for time, so they maybe didn't want to worry about ADR. Come on. Almost got him. Almost got you. There we go. I love how his face kind of like squishes in. Makes As that happens in the movie, his face kind of turns inside out a little bit. It's a weird distortion effect. All right, we made it to the end. Let's see here. Watch the cute little animated intro. Vigo getting scared off by the Statue of Liberty, which is funny because this is literally the only reference to that part in the movie. Um, the Activision game actually has I think 2 levels where you are taking over the Statue of Liberty and you have to shoot ghosts coming at you. It's sort of a Space Invaders style um, gameplay. Um, Maybe next year I'll play that one. But yeah, I this is a fun little game. Um, my favorite Ghostbusters game, I think. Oh well, not I think I know. It's the one that they most recently came out with. Uh, this is Ghostbusters the video game. They got the original cast back. This is before Harold Ramis passed away, and even though I think the plot is, it recycles a little bit too much of stuff from the first movie. It's still a lot of fun. I love how they utilize the gadgets and things like that. I think I would have preferred actually playing one of the Ghostbusters rather than being a new recruit. Um, and it would have been cool just to do a game that adapted the 2 movies and maybe filled in the blanks with some side jobs and things like that. But um, overall, it's a great game. I really like it, and as I said, it's my favorite. But here we are at the end, and I hope you guys have a happy New Year. And I know I haven't really put out that many videos other than these gameplay videos, but hopefully I'll have some new material to share in the future. But until then, have a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and thank you. Take care and God bless.